Hello, and welcome to the Dissonance Podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. This week's episode on social work education was inspired by a live stream panel discussion. Elizabeth is joined by Matt Watson from Pro Social Workers in a deep dive into recent research on strong self-reported commitment to ideological orthodoxy among social work higher education faculty. After our discussion, we have a Q&A with the author. Check out the show notes for more information on Pro Social Workers and how to access the full author Q&A. Hello, and welcome back to the Distance podcast. So today I am here with Matt Watson. I just recorded with a Mark, Matt Watson. And we're going to talk about an article called Embracing Our Values, Social Work Faculty Progressivism in a Conservative World. And it was in the International Journal of Social Work Values and Ethics in a 2023 volume. So Matt, I want to give you just an opportunity to introduce yourself and your credentials real quick.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I've lived and practiced in 5 different states in Arizona, Utah, Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. And I've been a social worker for almost for 28 years, and have just really enjoyed engaging people with different values and so forth. And I'm working on a project to promote viewpoint and political diversity in social work practice, and have engaged a number of other professional social workers in this endeavor.
So you actually asked me in a meeting to look for some articles on, whether anyone had investigated recently sort of the political, ideological, descriptive data about the field of social work and social work educators. And they actually, in this article, they reference an article that I didn't look up, but it's almost 20 years old? I think in the 2000 or something. That was they actually say, these authors say in 2023, but that's the most recent article they could find. Yeah. But I ran across this in my little search, and we both, that was like 24 hours ago or not even quite, right? And we both took one look at it and said, oh, we should talk about this. Sure. Yeah. I don't know. Do you know, is this, should I be impressed with this journal? It sounds very impressive. The International Journal of Social Work Values and Ethics. Is this a journal that you're familiar with?
I really don't know.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with it. I did find another article that in my prior work looking at for viewpoint and political diversity references, I did find another article in that same journal. It was regarding students. It was entitled Political Diversity Among Social Work Students. And so I think there's some interest in this article in looking at different values, different value and different perspectives. And so, but that's the only other reference that I had seen on this particular topic from the journal. It may have others, but I'm not super familiar.
Yeah, I just wondered if this was a prestigious journal or not, because neither one of us, fell in love with this.
Sure.
Fell in love with this article.
As you look at the introduction, interestingly, there were a number of we have access to the entire journal, and the introduction was very, has a lot of references from many social workers expressing appreciation and gratitude. And I wasn't sure if that was common in all the volumes, or if it was just something unique to this one where they're reflecting on some different things. But
yeah,
people kind of like it.
Yeah, well, I honestly think that it's possible that that's a little bit of a generational thing. Like I find this, in my own work, where people send group emails, and every single person sends a reply, something along the lines of, great email.
Yeah,
It's like, oh my God. So yeah, I wonder if it's a little bit,
that could
of
be.
a new thing.
Yeah, could be. It could be.
So, I mean, this article, starts with what I assume is one of the ethical practices. They certainly state it that way. Social work faculty have an ethical imperative to engage in policy and political practice. Now, that is the way that they state. Is that the way that it is stated in the Social Work Code of Ethics?
Yeah. So political action is embedded in the code of ethics, and so it is important. They're accurate in describing that. Um, I think that there's great value in some of the work that they've done in this article. There's certainly some things that I would refer to myself, feel comfortable. The interpretation that they draw from the conclusions that they draw are things where I would differ. But definitely in the code of ethics, we are um, encouraged to participate. What the code of ethics doesn't define is that you need to take a certain ideological approach to engaging in the political realm. And so that is where I think they would diverge a little bit and from the actual code of ethics.
Yeah, I mean, even when I get to, they say, social work is political, and that there is no such thing as a non-political social worker. And, the current political divide and the call to action from the National Association of Social Work, essentially is their reasoning for why they wrote this article. I don't know. I mean, would you agree that social work is political and that there's no such thing as a apolitical social worker?
Well, I think that where I would want to differentiate a little bit from that perspective is saying that some of social work is political, but not all social work is political. And part of my observation or concern has been that social work, the profession, is being politicized so that we are shrinking our level of influence and we're shrinking the tent of social workers if we suggest that social work values are political, are one particular ideological set of values. Social work is much broader than political work. There are many things that we do that may not necessarily be social. And I like to say that social work is primarily social in nature, not necessarily political.
So again, you're not taking issue, and I certainly can't, with any of the way that they describe the social work code of ethics. But they do talk about the Council on Social Work Education, which you already have said in a previous meeting you're not that familiar with, but and they say the Educational Policy and Accreditation Standards Committee or whatever require that students are competently prepared to engage in policy practice, which, as you point out, does not mean political practice, right? Although, as we read through the article, they do seem to be, the authors seem to sort of imply that they're inexorably linked, entwined, I guess. And what they claim that in this article, they seek to address the following question. What are the political affiliations and political ideologies of social work faculty, which is the first part of the article?
Yeah.
And what impact do they have on social work faculty policy preferences? And I would argue that they certainly didn't do any research on how it impacts faculty social work practice. What they did was research the political, orientations or whatever. And then this is almost like two articles. Then they went off on their little tangent about, they went off on their own little political value tangent. So the first half of the article, though, is really about what you asked me to look for when I did my little literature search, which is
Sure.
what's the ideological representation of social workers. So we can start with that because that's we are interested in that. Why we ended up looking at this article at all.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So
I might add something.
yeah,
I really do appreciate the work that they did in that first part of the article in identifying that ideology. And that explains, or at least provides some explanation for other research that's been done regarding social work students. Specifically, Ashley Davis and Rebecca Myrick, where they did some research on microaggressions that bachelors of social work students experience. And one of their unexpected findings was that that those with conservative values, or who were more traditional in their values, they reported a higher. They were a group that experienced a great deal of microaggressions, or they themselves just recognize that their values, their perspectives, were not necessarily welcome.
right.
And this, I think, provides a little bit of context for that particular study.
Absolutely. I mean, again, right, the very first sentence is ideology is a fairly coherent and comprehensive set of ideas. This is their definition. A fairly comprehensive and coherent set of ideas that, number one, explains, number two, evaluates social conditions. So explains and evaluates social conditions. And three, helps people understand their place in society. And four, provides a program for social and political action. So this is their definition of they borrowed it from somebody. So when I was reading this, it felt like they were saying once a social worker knows their ideology, they have an obligation to do something with that. Now, the question is, do they have an obligation to share it, to act on it, to hide it? It's good to know, where you stand and everything, but that's like, I'm like, well, are you going to answer this question? Like I was hoping it's like, are you going to answer this question? Because, okay, you've defined ideology. What does that mean for a social worker? And, so anyway, that was my question. It's like, oh, good. I'm going to find out, what respondents think about, ideology and how that plays a role in their daily lives as a social worker. We can debate whether they get there or not.
Sure.
So then their other definition, because, they rightly start with definitions. So they say that contemporary conservative ideology is characterized as being reluctant to change, thriving on tradition, and viewing people as quite capable of taking care of themselves. Now, I recognize that from a previous conversation, that third part, quite capable of taking care of themselves, as actually part of social work ethics, right?
Mm-hmm. Self-determination.
And so it's important to keep in mind that something that they later take issue with is like an aspect of the social work ethics. And then present day, they qualify as present day ideology. Liberal ideology is characterized by being open to change, progressively looking for solutions, and viewing the government as the best mechanism for providing services and opportunities. So we've already got sort of, in psychology, we would call this system justification. So this description of conservatives as, sort of justifying, the status quo,
Sure.
and everything. And then liberals as, the agents of change, they're out there helping
Sure.
people.
Sure.
So I am already annoyed.
Well, tell me about that. What annoys you about it?
Well, because I think that, so I don't particularly like system justification theory. So that's,
Okay.
one thing that I would say about this is that system justification theory is a bit, what is that called? Recursive, where it's
Okay.
like it loops up onto itself.
Sure.
So it's like, oh, system justification theory is a thing because conservatives endorse it, and because conservatives endorse it, system justification is a thing. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's
Okay.
so
Yeah.
I don't
It's a circular argument.
it is, yeah. And
Yeah.
I don't really buy into it. And there is some research, for example, in Germany, a recent study found that it was the moderates who were system justifiers, and it was the extremes on the left and the right who were would scored as liberal or progressives. They both wanted change. They wanted change in different ways.
Sure.
And they wanted some of the same changes, but for different people, for example. So the right wing progressives or liberals wanted more government assistance, but only for citizens.
Okay.
The left also wanted it for citizens, but wanted it extended to others. So
Okay.
I don't particularly like the idea of right and left being defined through system justification theory. So that bugs me. And then it also kind of bugged me about the part about, this it's almost somehow, it's like, oh, they think people can take care of themselves. And, that's somehow a lesser of, and so that
it's somewhat pejorative.
yes.
Okay. All right. So it's defined in a certain light, and I have noticed that another article that defined differences in social workers. It kind of defined things in ways that I don't necessarily think are accurate. That the conservatives were for the for-profit individual, kind of self-oriented group, and the liberal was more open and altruistic and so forth. And I would suggest that for some conservatives, it's more about personal or private enterprise, where with those who lean left or liberal may want to see some government involvement that's looking out for those who, for whatever reason, are on the margins or who may struggle, and kind of looking out for the less fortunate, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, they have to define it somehow. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like for the purposes of this paper, I mean, I'm not going to quibble with them, overly, but I did,
Sure.
I did find that like a little bit annoying. So,
Yeah.
they're like going through sort of the history of literature. But one of the things that I wanted to mention was that this idea of, liberals being, interested in change and that kind of thing, and that being concentrated in higher ed. Look,
Sure.
Higher ed is self-selecting for, what in personality literature that we might call openness to experience.
Exactly.
So people who are open to experience, are more likely to pursue higher ed. They're like, sure, bring it on. I'll read about something that,
Sure.
And so there is this sort of self-selection process that's going on. I don't know how, and I'm sure that that's happening in social work also. Social workers would tend maybe to be more open in their interactions with other people. It's like, oh, you're living a lifestyle that I don't necessarily agree with. I don't have to agree with that in order to recognize that you need assistance in some way.
Yeah.
And so, I think that I think that it's probably unlikely that someone who rose through, pursued a PhD, for example, in social work, who was then, then became an academic, would be maybe moderate, but probably not right-leaning, simply because there are fewer right-leaning people in in higher ed to start with, and then you think about the field. Each of the fields would differ in sort of the lure, I guess, if you will, of the field to particular people with particular, interests and penchants for things. So, yeah, they mention here that students tend to be more conservative. And again, I was reading another article that said the same thing, that, students have this more plurality towards the center, and, um, but I don't think we should be surprised by that. The longer people spend in school, they're essentially self-selecting. But I think it's really important, though, that faculty and administrators understand that they are, they should be serving a broader community. And this, I'm not sure that they're very aware of that. Honestly, or that I would say maybe they don't want to be aware of it. They want to just kind of go on their own, their own thing. So that leads me into this. I have a question mark here on this. So they say on the next page, so what page is this? 198. Traditionally, theoretical perspectives and pedagogy utilized in social work education tend to arise from a conservative paradigm. Both social work education and academic institutions in which social work education occurs have a conservative nature that is counter to the progressive ideology that is typically expressed by social work students and social work practitioners. I don't teach in the social work program, but I am a college educator.
Yeah.
And I would say that you would be hard pressed to find an educational program that arises currently, from a conservative program, or a that has a conservative nature that runs counter to progressive ideology.
Right.
I was just a little bit, and I don't historically. I mean, are they talking about because there's merit in education, that's conservative? I don't know what they mean by that.
Yeah, I was a little confused by that as well. So I've tried to, as I was reading it, I was trying to figure out how they might be defining that. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if they were referring to things like that, are under scrutiny by some, that involve merit, that involve standardized testing, that involve standards, of performance, and that those standards, those boundaries, those criteria for merit, if that is what they were referring to as conservative. Or the other thing is learning from experience, learning from past generations. We would say, flawed though they may be, they still provided some benefit to help the world get to where it is today. Others may argue, well, they were flawed, and they were racist, and they were homophobes, and they were misogynist, and therefore we need to overturn those institutions that that had those fatal flaws, if you will. And I wasn't sure what that meant, but it would be interesting to have a conversation and understand where they were coming from. Because if you look at the literature on faculty in social sciences, it's predominantly left leaning.
And has been. I mean, since I think I was just reading. I think that like the original, like the first study of professor ideology and stuff was like 1969, 1970,
Yeah,
and it was like 44.7% liberal. And so
right.
moderates, and it's like, oh, you say, oh, well, that's just, that's less than half. Yeah, but there's like, multiple categories beyond that. And so I don't think you'd find very many, extreme conservatives in the remaining, 55% or whatever. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, it just, I was wondering if I certainly don't know in my own field that there's some sort of like, ongoing conservative,
Yeah,
but again,
yeah,
that sort of colonial, the sort of idea where, we have to decolonize, stuff, and
sure,
we have to do anti-racist syllabi, and don't ask
sure.
me what that is because I don't really know what it is, but
Yeah,
but I know that I'm supposed to do an anti-racist syllabus.
very
Um,
good.
yeah. So then we get to the social welfare policy preferences section. So
Hmm.
page 199, racial policy preferences are of uh, immediate, no, immense importance as a nation's economic system and social safety net is among the greatest factors in determining the amount of poverty in a nation. So they're established now. This is where we haven't gotten to the statistics yet, but they have put their stake in the ground, right? Like,
Mm.
if racial policy preferences are of immense importance, so we have, we know where they're going to eventually go, even, so you know, if we'll see later in the article, but if you aren't on board with this,
Hmm.
you are not a social worker. I mean, we're going
Yeah.
to see that shows up later in the article. So they used something called the Welfare Policies Questionnaire. Have you ever heard of this? I mean,
Not until I read
yeah.
this.
Again,
This
I'm not a
yeah,
social work researcher, but
yeah,
people can, uh, you know, it's usable. It's in the public domain,
sure.
and has established, internal and external reliability. That would be considered maybe not awesome, but but pretty good. So it's not a horrible scale or anything like that.
As
Um,
utility.
yeah. Um, so they use they do all kinds of demographic questions, and then they use this social welfare policy questionnaire. They had uh, you may not have noticed this because but as somebody who's done a lot of survey research
Right.
in industry and in in other in academia, um, they had an almost 20% response rate to this survey.
Oh,
That is huge. I mean, 10% is phenomenal.
really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you get
Yeah,
a
I wasn't
10%,
aware of that.
and let's not forget that this was just sent in an email to people, right?
Right.
So they got from the national, I think that they got it from your national organization. They got a list of faculty and email
I think
that,
they went through and they went to every accredited university and
right.
got them. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's how they do it. It was a lot of work. It was very
It, yeah, the list was provided to them, I think,
okay.
by the accrediting,
The
now
CSWE.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
I
Yeah.
should have that highlighted here. So yeah, a list of the accredited social work programs in the United States was obtained from this, what is that,
CSWE.
CSWE website. Every program
Yep.
website was searched to acquire the names and email addresses. So I was wrong. They were not provided. They were provided with
Yeah.
the list,
It was
and
a
then
lot
they
of work.
it was a lot of work. Yeah. Um, so over 1,000 full-time faculty members, uh, you know, responded. I mean, this is like, again, like this just blew me away. And
Yeah.
I think now let me just compare this with a survey that was done by some sociologists that was trying to capture, similar kinds of things. They were doing other things, but they had they were trying to figure out what the ideological, tenor was. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And they didn't ask questions specifically about someone's field. So it wasn't about this was specifically about the field of social work, this study.
Okay. Yeah.
But the other researchers' study was more general, and it was multi-field. Okay.
Mhm.
So they were trying to, and the questions that they were asking weren't specifically about, so because they were multi-fields, they were things like, some students aren't uh, well suited for college. Okay.
Mm.
So they're trying to get at a different kind of, but still they asked the demographic questions, and what they found was that, left leaning, especially radical left leaning professors were more likely to say, oh no, everyone's suited for college. Like
Mm.
everyone can do
Mm.
well no matter what. And,
Yeah.
and they were more likely to engage in grade inflation and those kinds of things. But
Interesting.
they got only a 10% response rate, number one. And number two, they got a lot of nasty comments. How dare you ask these
Oh,
questions?
yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So these questions offend my sensibilities. They are, how could you possibly get this through an institutional review board and blah, blah, blah. So having been on the heels of reading that previous article and doing a podcast on it, and then reading this one, I was
Yeah.
like, okay, so this is a captive audience. I mean, this is an interested audience. This is an audience that knows I don't know what the consent document, the email said, but these are people who were like, yay, I get to show what a great person I am, kind of thing. Does that make sense? As opposed
Sure.
to, we're going to get at this from different angles. So I did think it was important and interesting to note that they got a high rate of response, which may also indicate something about the survey or the survey methods. I don't know exactly what,
Interesting.
but it might. And I would want to talk to the authors I'd be interested to talk to the authors about why they think they got such a
Sure.
great response rate. Were they, they do say that they followed up after 2 weeks, or that's standard procedure. You follow up,
Exactly.
but you don't bug people. But
Right.
people clicking on surveys within their email, 20% is
Yeah.
like, anyway.
That's
So
amazing.
I think that's worth kind of pondering,
Mastering a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and they do analyze they find that their, scale, did a good job,
Uh-huh.
blah, 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 matched up with the original authors, and everything. Now, when we get to the analysis of the data,
Uh-huh.
well, first of all, should we talk about what the breakup of faculty was?
What the percentages were in their political
Yeah.
leanings. Yeah.
So let me see here. So Native American, let's see, 84%, 86.4% self-identified as being on the liberal political ideological continuum. 30.3% extremely liberal, 45% of that, just liberal, 11% slightly liberal, 9.4% moderate, 4.2% on the conservative continuum. So only 4.2% somewhere on the conservative continuum. So there's so many liberals that they divided it up, like from extreme to, so I think that's, that's what you already guessed and what previous research had shown. But we certainly have, then these are slightly different too. So although 86.4% self-identified as being on the liberal ideological continuum, 78% affiliated with Democratic Party, and 3.5% with Republican. So the rest of them were independent, basically.
Yeah.
So we have, even smaller. So even though a few more were willing to say that they were conservative than to say that they were Republican.
Gotcha.
So, which also shows up later or in a minute here. So they do a regression analysis, and I just want to point out that they say this. So they say the results of the regression to predict, in this case, restrictive welfare policy preference revealed that 7 predictors explained 16.2% of the variance in endorsement of restrictive policies. And by restrictive policies, they mean things like if people don't follow the rules, some of their benefits should be cut. They should be required to either look for or get a job. Those are what's called restrictive. So if we're talking about all the social workers across all the United States, 16.2% is a lot of the variance. Like if you're talking about a disease, like you have cancer or something, and somebody says, 16.2% of the probability that you'll recover, is explained by whether you drink milk, you're going to be like, well, shit, I won't drink milk. I mean, it's 16.2%. Now, if they said 16.2% of whether you are going to, recover, I say recover, live another, 10 years or whatever, we're going to remission, is going to be about how much milk you drink, whether you, sit on the left side or the right side of the couch, how much coffee you drink, whether you walk at least this many miles a day, and if we name off 7 things, and then you're like, well, can we, it's like, I don't know if I can do all of those 7 things just to get a 16, can you pick 3 of the best ones? I don't know. But 16.2% of the variance to me is not impressive. Okay. It's like, okay, we can explain some of people, it's like, that's a lot of variance in human behavior, especially when you think about any individual that you might run into, right? Because these statistics are not designed to be interpreted through the individual. It's the big picture. So when you start thinking about, well, any individual person that I run into, this means nothing. It means nothing in terms of any individual person. But it does mean, again, if we're talking about like the masses, it's, okay, 16% of the variance, 7 variables. And the variables were, race and ethnicity. So whiteness was more associated with, conservative or restrictive. What their primary interest was in teaching. I mean, that's essentially useless. How can you can't, the fact that it was the second most predictive variable and we could never know that about someone, primary practice interest in poverty, participation in advocacy, well, we would expect that to be negatively linked, right? Primary practice interest in international social work, that was positively related. Then we get to political affiliation did not significantly predict social welfare policy preference. So we have 7 variables that explains 16.2% of the variance. And one of them is not political affiliation. Right. So I thought that was really, really interesting. So ideological view was a significant predictor, but political affiliation was not. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was, do you think that ideological perspective, shifts, not so much with politics, but what about time in the field of social work? Jadedness, or lack of a better.
That's interesting. Well, and I don't know, because you may know the research better than I on this, but don't people typically become more conservative as they age?
That's what I'm wondering, is if that's part of what this is that who's likely to be a faculty member?
Right.
Older people, right?
Right.
They're older. They're not the young ideal, like
Yeah.
so, and also maybe these are people who practiced in the field and maybe left the field for education because this is hard work. Hard work that seems to yield very little. And so
Right.
you go in, why do you become an educator? You become an educator because you want to feel like you're making a contribution. Why do you become
Sure.
a social worker? Because you want to feel like you're making a contribution. If you move from the field of social work, if you get jaded, if you get burnt out and you
Right.
go to education, you can feel like you're contributing. And I
Making it.
wonder if ideological perspective gets a little more conservative with age, with
Yep.
experience, with perhaps even a little bit of a little pushback, like the recent kind of stuff that we're facing, that it makes people go, this is, come on, this is a little.
Yeah.
And so if that's why, look, these are still people who identify as Democrats,
Yes.
but who on the scale, so now you're not talking about a 0-1 or so Democrat Republican. Now you're
Sure.
talking about something that's a scale, right? So these might not be people who were super high on the scale, right? Even
Okay.
if people are concentrated towards the more liberal end of the scale, it's
Correct.
still predictive. So a little bit of movement towards the sort of more conservative end of the scale still predicted more interest or support, again on a scale, for more restrictive policies. So that was the best predictor, after which was race. But yeah, I just wondered what you thought about that. That's what went into my mind.
So the absence of a liberal political ideological view significantly predicted restrictive social policy preferences.
Right. So that,
and then
again,
ironically, political affiliation, Democratic, did not significantly predict restrictive social welfare policy preferences.
Right. And again, this is a scale, right? And so people it's not a 0-1. So it's not like, oh, I'm this political ideology or I'm that one. It's a scale. Right. And so, as people maybe move away from the extreme, then they were also saying, well, you know what? I also agree. Maybe I'm not a 7 on the scale, but maybe I'm a 4 on the scale for people should look for work.
Yeah.
Like
people should look for work, or it should be time limited, or there should be some parameters.
Right. So I've been around the block a few times, and I've seen, I've seen things kind of idea, I've seen things. I don't know. Yeah.
Exactly. And let's see. It didn't get into the demographics, did it, of age?
None of those things were predictive. They just got, they got. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was just a thought that ran through my mind, because when we get to supporting the progressive items on the scale, again, political ideological view is predicting progressive, policy preference. So now we got the other spectrum, so it's instead of being negatively, predictive, it's positively
restrictive.
And again, some of the practice,
so
preferences.
6 of these factors, 6 predictors explained, again, 16.5% of the variance. So almost exactly. Yeah.
It's almost exactly. And in this case, political affiliation. So we have the double thing count here, where we have ideology and political affiliation predicted on this one. So yeah. So we have stuff that we really, wouldn't know about. Somebody couldn't really, couldn't predict what kind of how they how their practice was oriented or their research interests or whatever. But we do have some of these other things. And again, yeah, I mean, look,
so there were some of these social work faculty that that self-identified as Democrat that to some degree favored restrictive.
Correct.
But of those who endorse progressive policy preferences, they were both of the 6 factors. 2 of those were political orientation in nature, meaning liberal and Democrat.
Ideological. Yeah.
Democrat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But again, we have 65%, almost 65% of the variance in both groups that is unaccounted for, accounted for by other things.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, stuff, I mean, that's a lot of variance that's unaccounted for by this model. So it's not nothing, you know, but it's, you know, I don't think we need to, we're not throwing a party just yet.
Sure.
So then the second part of the article is where we both felt like they just went off on a tangent.
Mm-hmm.
So they're arguing that this data that they collected then should be, gives them a platform, I guess, for making an argument that is, you know, completely separate. They say that these are implications for social work education. They say the study reveals that social work educators overwhelmingly identify with liberal, progressive, political, ideological paradigm, correct?
Yeah.
And that they are overwhelmingly progressive, right? And they go on to say that they want to argue that social work and academia should take 2 key steps. Primarily, social work academics should embrace progressivism, and they should unapologetically include progressive theory and pedagogy in their teaching. I wrote, what? Next to that, I was like, that's what it means. So the fact that are they actually arguing that the minuscule amount of people in their study who are not progressives are to be feared, to be ostracized, to be re-educated? I mean, they're saying like we need to unapologetically include progressive theory and pedagogy. They're using the fact that it's overwhelmingly progressive to say we need to do more of that because it's again, it's this recursive, the circular reasoning, like the circular reasoning of system justification theory. It's mostly liberal, progressive. Therefore, the education should be mostly liberal and progressive. Therefore, we will produce more liberal and progressive people. It's like this. Right. That is not. I don't know. Were you as like freaked out when you read that?
Yeah. Well, I was surprised. I didn't quite follow the logic there, especially in a profession that looks out for the minority and that invites diversity and that encourages inclusiveness. And I just wonder a little bit about that. To what degree do you want social work to be a monolith? Do you want social work
to sounds like they do.
One ideology?
Yeah.
Or do you want social work to have a plurality, you know, to enhance pluralism where there are multiple viewpoints, multiple perspectives that learn to identify and appreciate the differences that each one brings to the table, that each value brings to the table, and can respectfully dialogue across differences and find common ground and live together.
And go out into the community and help people that don't agree with them. Right?
Exactly.
You know, I mean, that's what I would have hoped that I was hoping that when I got to this part, they would say, okay, we got ourselves a little problem. and we need to, open our minds and introduce in the classroom new ideas and topics, and exactly what you're talking about. Discuss in the classroom and be prepared to discuss out of the classroom how people that have very different viewpoints can live happily ever after. Like, we don't have to agree with our neighbor on everything. We don't have to agree with our clients on everything. That's not that's a separate issue.
Exactly.
So they say that they say that they want to embrace progressivism. They want to maintain a liberal and progressive stance as the overall social work identity. So they're pretty clear about that they do want a monolith. That's okay with, not only okay with them, but that they want social work education to continue along those lines. They even say educators in higher education must prepare to have their pedagogy and curriculum criticized. The threat comes from the political right, whose viewpoints contradict with those of liberal progressives. So I don't disagree that there's threats from the political right. I mean, there are places we can definitely find some.
Sure.
I mean, I wrote next to that, are you kidding? Like, the threat. No, it is a threat comes from the political right.
Definitely.
There are many threats. And one of them, I think, that this demonstrated is from within, right? It's like that old horror movie, the calls are coming from inside the house. It's like, no, inside the house is, potentially undermining, what it means to educate. I mean, even not just in social work, but what it means to educate.
Right. Yeah. It really is interesting that if you are, again, defining social work values are inherently progressive values. Well, it's almost like, challenge me on this. I'm not looking for the confirmation bias, but as I'm trying to understand this and process through in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, in the Democrat Party, there are multiple groups of individuals. It's a coalition of many different groups. And if you are someone who leans towards I'm not pro-union, can I still be a Democrat? Pro-labor, can I still be a Democrat? Or if I'm not defining myself as a government solution, taking a government solution ideology, but I'm still a person of color, sexual minority. I still have other things that draw me into the Democrat Party. Do I need to check all those check boxes if I'm not progressive? If I'm, in other words, do I have to be progressive to be a social worker? Do I have to check all these other boxes in order to be a social worker?
Yeah, and how many things on which do I have to be progressive? Like, can I be progressive on 3 out of 5? Or
Yeah. And what does it mean in terms of these progressive values? Do we go back to the questionnaire and say there should be no limits, lifetime limits on receiving welfare benefits, or there should be no limits at all? That there should be no means-based assessments of distribution. Welfare recipients should be able to receive welfare benefits while attending a 4-year college program. Well, if I don't agree with that, should I, am I no longer progressive enough? And I think these ideas certainly are worth discussing and debating. At the same time, we always have to, I think, ask the question, where do you draw the line? Where, and that's perhaps a conservative question to ask, because it is constraining. And to some degree, American conservatism is based in a model of constraint and law and order and boundaries and those kinds of things. But is there ever a degree? Is there ever a point at which progressivism can go too far?
And I definitely don't think that these authors are asking themselves that question. I think
that's the kind of dialogue I would like to have, not in an adversarial way, but in a very pragmatic, functional way. Just what does this mean in terms of practice?
And if there is no line, okay, so you say, oh, there's no, then I mean, I would like to ask that person then, do you have any values? What, so are there other aspects of your life where there are lines where you would say, oh, if, somebody cheated on me 1 time, 10 times, like, what, is there a line there? Like, and so to sort of, take that into, it's like, where's your core? If there's never a line, what's your core, and how do you interact with friends and family, build relationships, and then how do you build relationships outside, at work, and then in the community and everything, if you have no core values of your own. That doesn't mean you have to impose them on other people, but they do guide us. I mean, do we stop at stoplights or not? I mean, it's like there has to be a line. It's like, oh, well, if it's if it's yellow, we keep going. Okay, is it okay to ever give someone a ticket if it's a yellow light? So these are it's like, yeah, it's really hard when you start to think about things like what's on this questionnaire, right? These are hard questions that that make you think.
Resource allocation is finite.
Hopefully,
this is what we do, and this is what I think is one of the core issues of social work. Is there are finite resources in the world. There are finite resources in a community, in a country. I myself am finite in my time, attention, energy, in my relationships. Those are all finite. And so while this idea of openness is in being inclusive of everyone and so forth, is I think it's obviously one of the big five, and there is some strength to some openness. I think that's really important for social workers to be open to different perspectives. But the question always comes in, to what degree?
Yeah, if you're infinitely open, how do you ever go anywhere? We would be stuck all the time, open to every possibility all the time. We would be frozen.
Yeah. It's exactly that. If there's never organization, if there's never differentiation, that it's all just rolled together into one thing, and there's never clarification of how do we establish policy to ensure that there is order, that there isn't waste, that there isn't, preventing waste takes care of the poor.
Yes.
Preventing waste ensures that we have better resources to help the less fortunate, to help them, be able to address their challenges. If we want a progressive government, bureaucracy, or services and resource distribution wing, well, to what degree? Has it worked out well for that role to take the place of natural caregivers, of family members, of communities, of neighbors? Do you really want to outsource all of those kinds of things that in the traditions of American patriotism, conservatism, nationalism. I don't know if nationalism would be the right term for that,
Well,
but
just
just that community mindedness.
human survival,
Sure,
is based on this, right? I
sure.
mean, it's
To
our
me, that
ability.
is more social work.
Yeah.
That is social work. The political work is where you're trying to influence, to rally and gather. And not all political work is coercive, but most coercive work
Is political.
is political. It's
Yeah.
about power. And so just keeping that in mind, that generally speaking, there are a lot of people, a lot of communities who function very, very well without coercion.
Yeah. And again, like we could point to plenty of research on, evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology,
Right.
to just talk about the human coordination and cooperation and, society in general. Like that's, yeah. Do we want to usurp that with programs and policies and everything?
Exactly.
So anyway, then they say social work. Um, uh, well, they actually say they're concerned about people having to register their the political preference of professors, limit the discussion of critical race theory and implicit bias. I mean, I would argue that implicit bias. Most people who discuss implicit bias probably aren't really aware of the research.
Exactly.
That has never been able to reliably and link it to behavior of any kind, and
Right.
eliminate
Well, and
discussion.
this is an important point. I'm not a big fan of government coming in and saying you can't talk about implicit bias, or you can't talk about critical theory or critical race theory. Um, I think it, it has its place, but it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be subject to the same scrutiny that other things have. And if you're going to open up um, the schools to things without without empirical support, well, then you have to open up the school to other things that also don't have
Right.
empirical support.
And speaking of
And
where is the line, right?
exactly, exactly. Then do you want public schools to be places of worship, and what is going to be worshipped in that particular area? Um, do we want there to be a separation of the empirical and the non-empirical? Do we want there to be a separation between skills and lack of skills? Literary things are obviously not necessarily empirical, but you can learning to read and learning to comprehend. Those things are measurable, and so there is having an appreciation for the arts and so forth. That's not necessarily empirical, but there's space for it.
Mm-hmm.
There's space for it, and so it might be that there needs to be space. If you want to make space for non-empirical things, put things in the empirical realms, in the scientific realms, put things in the non-empirical, and just know which realm you're dealing with.
Right. So yeah, so they're concerned obviously by certain, by that. What they aren't concerned about is the forces that are requiring us to take these perspectives, to include this in our teaching. And they don't seem worried about that. So again, I kind of made light of like an anti-racist syllabus or whatever. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I don't really know what that. I mean, when I try to figure out what an anti-racist syllabus is, I can't really figure it out. It seems to require that you have office hours. I don't know who wouldn't put their office hours on a syllabus, for example, that you require that you have due dates. I mean, these are like, kind of silly things that every syllabus has. I don't know how that makes it anti-racist. Maybe it's by having a indigenous land statement on your syllabus. I don't know, but certainly there's more explicit. So that's sort of a, it's like, oh, you should do this, right? And on our like reappointment letters and stuff, it suggests that we go to the certain offices to learn how to do that. So the implication is you need to do that in order to make sure that you get tenure. Okay. So it doesn't say, it says it, but, gently, you should go to these offices and learn how to do an anti-racist syllabus. You should go to here and learn how to decolonialize your materials. Certainly there's, there are things, I was told in the hallway, I was lucky to have my job because of a research study that I had done that included a perspective that people didn't like. My significant other didn't get tenure because he had standards so there are rules that they aren't concerned about. I say rules. There are pressures to include these kinds of things, to reduce the focus on merit and increase the focus on, including, these, non-empirical kinds of
ideological,
in a classroom. And so I agree that I'm like you. It's like, I agree that these things should not be banned and they should also not be requirements.
Correct.
And I'm not sure that either one is, explicitly done in most places. There are a few places in the country where they are, saying that, you can't say this, or, although even that I think is an exaggeration, but certainly, people are worried that they might say the wrong thing, in some states on the one side, but I'm certainly worried that I might say the wrong thing on the, on the other side. So, so I just noticed what was missing here, which is a concern that, for academic freedom in general, they're concerned about a very specific threat from a specific, from a direction that they disagree with, and they're calling for social activism in defense of educators' rights to include these things. But certainly they're not concerned about an educator's right to exclude one of those. And frankly, when you're teaching a content area, if I'm teaching cognitive psychology, do I really need to include critical race theory in that class? And if you go through go to K through 12, like Johnny can't read, but we want to make sure we cover gender issues or whatever. So anyway, so they're specifically not concerned about that, but they say social work educators need to prepare for civil disobedience in defense of these kinds of things. I just wrote down, this paper does not make a good academic freedom example. It's like they're not.
So, and I didn't quite understand. Prepare for civil disobedience. Is that encouraging the civil disobedient, or is that suggesting that the civilly disobedient are going to show up and try to intrude and interrupt their coursework and their classes?
Yeah, it's not clear, right? Because the rest of that sentence says the social work educators should prepare for civil disobedience when state laws conflict with the value and ethics of social work profession. Educators must also ensure that academic freedom is not merely an ideal, but a practice within their department. But again, they're making, academic freedom like a one-sided academic freedom. So I'm not sure whether it means like we have to engage in civil disobedience to defend our right to teach these things in classes, or if, like you said, you need to prepare for like somebody to march, or show up on your campus and I don't know.
When was the last time that you recall the political right interrupting a class or a speaker or shouting down or attempting to cancel?
I sure can't. I can't think of one offhand. I'm sure there have been, but I certainly can't think of one offhand. Now, what about the buses that showed up at the in Boston, not buses, but vans with the pro-Israel messages that, they showed up
Yeah,
with vans. I don't know that that would be necessarily the political right.
sure.
So, but that's like, I'm reaching here. That's
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I'm just noticing. But think about how often the progressive left cancels, shouts down, uh, deplatforms somebody with a different viewpoint.
right.
And I think that ultimately harms their cause, because if you don't, it's not going to be, it's not going to stand up to scrutiny. Yeah,
Well, so interesting. There's a parallel there then, because again, that same article that I was just reading, they made the argument that many of the sort of socially liberal demonstrations and civil disobedience related to, say, the Vietnam War,
yeah,
divestment from African, South African, I can't even, they listed 4 or 5.
yeah.
That those are now sort of mainstream ideas,
Hmm.
that, uh, you know, um, and so there's this idea that, well, we're on the right side of history, and
Hmm.
that justifies our, this kind of, like, historically, we can think of 5 things about
Sure.
which, well, LGBTQ rights and,
Hmm.
same-sex marriage, and again, uh, healthcare for all, like, oh, these are things that about which most, in the mistakes made, in terms of the Vietnam War, and that maybe we shouldn't have,
Hmm.
yeah, that now those are part of sort of, most people, again, a plurality of people would agree with
Sure.
most of that movement, that directional movement. And so I feel like it's almost it's like a sort of a righteous kind of indignation, sort of like, see,
Sure.
we just have to get you to come with us, because look, now you're with us on these other things, so you have to come,
Right.
it's like we just have to keep working on you to get you to come with us on these other things.
Right.
And so I do think that there's a little bit of that.
Sure. Well, and the uh, some things have required, civil disobedience. I mean, it has, but generally that's the exception, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, we say these things like, oh, the public consciousness is kind of moved in these directions, but that gets, but just a little while ago you said, well, I'm going to assert something, and check me on this, right?
Yeah.
So even though political consciousness has, public consciousness has kind of moved, that doesn't mean that nobody ever asks the question, well, is
Yeah.
that okay for me?
Yeah.
Or does that mean, the fact that the idea that maybe Vietnam was a mistake, does that mean Ukraine is a mistake?
Hmm.
We're still allowed to ask these questions. The idea that we moved in one direction on a few things doesn't
Sure.
even mean that those things are analogous to what we are experiencing right now, and that we should just accept, oh, because civil disobedience brought us, same-sex marriage, we should just be like, woohoo, I'm on board, right? No, maybe just because, look, I mean, we could go with abortion, for example.
Hmm.
So it turns out that public consciousness has moved, like, turns out that it's hurting the Republicans, right? So as much as we were hearing like, oh, we need more, most people think that, they we believe hypocritical things. We believe that abortion should be
Sure.
available to all and not available to all. And it turns out that when you start to restrict it, people are like, I don't really like that, right? So if
Hmm.
you sometimes things are revealed to you, again, to get back to your line thing, where is the line? It turns out
Hmm.
oh, most people didn't know where the line was, but now they're thinking about it and they're like, yeah, turns out there is a line, and I'm not happy with this.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I'm not really keen on this argument that because progressivism brought us things that a pluralistic majority would agree with, means that, we need to keep on that path. So
Right.
I was a little bit offended by it in the other article, and I'm a little annoyed by it here also. It's like,
Sure.
again, the main thing is it just bothers me when academics do this kind of thing.
Sure.
I mean, come on, look, I'm not immune from this at all. I have my own hypocrisies, including one about abortion. So I believe that if I believe in a woman's right to choose. And then I also believe that if I get in a car accident and I kill a woman and her baby and her unborn baby, that I've killed two people. So it's like I would use the argument, for pro-choice that, that's not yet a human being, and yet if I kill them in a car accident, then I've killed two human beings. This is a hypocrisy in my own consciousness, in my own belief system that I can't reconcile. I can't figure out how to fix that. And that's okay. I mean, it's like I don't have to fix that right this minute.
Your battle to fight, but the truth is we all have internal things that requires a little bit of internal social work. We also have things between parties, between individuals, between groups of people, between communities, nations, whichever, that ultimately requires some social work. And political work is not always the answer, as much as trying to figure out how to reconcile differences and how to integrate those with integrity.
Yeah, and a tolerance for this, for the complications and and potential hypocrisies of addressing these these social issues, this social work. You may not agree with and likely won't agree with most of the people with lifestyle with whom you interact. That there'll be some aspects of everyone's life that we that we can't get on board with. Does that mean that they don't deserve care or whatever? No, it doesn't. And so the fact that I'm not living the life that my social work client is doesn't mean that they're undeserving. So we can hold these two, even hypocritical values at the same time. We can have those. So I just would have liked to have seen a little more of that reflected here. So anyway, so then they say that they want to, that social work education needs to oppose any movement that that challenges these critical components of progressive work, and programs and educational institutions must evaluate how their own missions align with these progressive ideals. And I do think that this is an issue in higher ed generally, and probably in social work, that we have these two parallel missions. We have the mission of education and building knowledge, and we also have these social justice mission. And we haven't figured out how to manage the intersection of those two things.
Right. That's exactly it. And to me, that's more social work and social justice. The social work definition of social justice. Yes, you look out for the less fortunate, the marginalized, and the oppressed. You have to be mindful of that, because any situation, any system is going to, any solution that you identify is going to have unintended consequences, and there will be some collateral damage. So we always have to be mindful of that collateral damage, but always keep people to open up opportunities as much as possible to as many people as we can. And that doesn't necessarily mean equality of outcome, but the the progressive version of social justice can really undo social justice. If we don't allow people self-determination because we have, some type of a coercive entity that's trying to redistribute and make sure that that everyone's equal, that everyone's the same. And like you said earlier, there's sometimes some hypocrisy because not all of us want to be the same. We don't always want to be.
And they do talk about, they essentially, give an argument here for, the sort of syllabi and curriculum, incorporating anti-racism, anti-oppressive practice into the curriculum. Educators must reflect on their current theory and pedagogy. Historically, the theoretical perspective, again discussed in social work, is centered on a conservative paradigm. I mean, we already talked about that. It just doesn't resonate with either one of us.
Sure.
This idea that Freud, Piaget, and Erikson, because they're white men, I don't know if that's their reasoning there. It's just, it's a white man, so therefore it can't be useful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the irony, and maybe I should be quiet because of my immutable characteristics.
Yes. So then, one of the most, I'm being really critical of this article. I think if this were an opinion piece, it wouldn't bother me as much, but because it's presented as an empirical piece and then they go off on this tangent, it bothers me more. If they'd stuck with their original thing and then just sort of interpreted the data,
Sure.
in a couple of paragraphs. But anyway, so they say here that incorporating pedagogy that is responsive and addresses the diverse needs of social workers, totally fine with that. I get it. They're throwing that in there, just saying, guess what? We have some conservative people in our courses, so we maybe should take care of them too. But it's a throwaway, right? It's just it's a throwaway. It's not a real,
Yeah. And I would be interested to hear. Okay, how do you reconcile that with these other things that you're describing?
It almost made me think that an editor, like somebody read this and said, well, you got to throw a few bones in there. I don't know. So I was like, I don't know, because they're talking about, how pedagogy, perpetuates white supremacy, and then they say, but also we need to incorporate pedagogy that is responsive to the diverse needs of. It's like, okay. So then I get to the part under.
You might say that it's aspirational, that we recognize that these might be irreconcilable differences, but we should at least try. I mean, It's just one of those things where I would love to have a conversation and just better understand. Do they really mean what I'm interpreting them to mean? I could be misinterpreting this.
Right.
And could we work together on maybe an article that might help pursue whatever your desires are here in social work education?
So under considerations when embracing progressivism. So this really upset me. So they're basically saying here that we want to meet the dominant group where they are. Namely, social work educators must meet their peers and students where they are and guard against groupthink and prevent, the profession from being co-opted by partisan practice, partisan politics. But they're also saying that it is disingenuous and dangerous for educators to appear neutral in the face of significant economic, social, and human rights upheaval. So I don't know. I felt like they were very focused on They said, social workers are at the risk of appearing self-righteous. No kidding. Social work literature identifies a concern for alienating students who come from conservative perspectives. So they're talking out of both sides of their mouth here, right? They're saying, we have to make sure that that the education that they get is progressive, and yet, let's guard against alienating conservatives. I'm not really sure how you can do both, how you can ensure that you're meeting, the ideological left where they are and the ideological right where they are, while only providing a progressive, progressive content in your course. Yeah. I'm not sure how you can do that.
Well, this is where social work can enter into politics and say any solution that you're proposing, you're going to get pushback on that. So, Republicans, you're proposing this. What about, those who this decision is going to harm? This is how a lot of legislation gets done. You have people talking to each other rather than politicizing completely and just saying, well, this is what my party says. And when I say politicizing, I probably mean being partisan about it, that I can't talk to you. I can't figure things out. I can't consider the unintended consequences here. So what is the unintended consequences of a progressive ideology, a progressive pedagogy? Could there be some unintended consequences there? I think they're trying to acknowledge that, but I don't know that they're going there, because the article just comes across as too, to me, too married to a particular ideology, rather than saying social work. Yes, it is political. Yes, social workers do practice and engage in political work, but some of the best political work we do is looking at unintended consequences of any one of our proposals, our ideas, or our stances, and find ways to work together, find ways to mitigate those unintended consequences.
And one of the things you're focusing on here is asking questions. If we can't ask questions that might sound like they're, not from the far left, then how can we get at these things? If we're either self-censoring or we are censored in some way for asking those questions, how can we, make programs better? And like you said, reveal, uncover, turn over some rocks and see how maybe when some of those aren't working too well. Yeah.
So is coercion the most? It's a lot of times it's the quickest way to bring about a change, but is it the most sustainable and durable way? Might the Affordable Care Act have been more stable and stronger if it hadn't been pursued, aggressively and as aggressively as it was, and down party lines as it was? Could it, some might say, well, they tried for decades before that, nothing got done, so we had to do what we had to do, but then we've just always had to endure challenges.
Well, people like it, but they don't like it that it can, like you said. So it turns out people really like it. They just don't like Obamacare, but they like their health care.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you're talking about.
They don't like the brand of healthcare that they've got.
Right.
It's like, oh, this is worse than what I had before.
Yeah.
But
they like the idea, and they, so like you said, and since it came across as, as political, instead of, but again, you're right. Like, the argument, like, well, we tried bipartisan stuff for, forever and couldn't get it done. So, so what you just said then plays into, though, this sort of coercion. So coercion of, you were talking about more the coercion of a client or a policy or whatever. But in this article, they talk about essentially coercing students into either getting with the program or leaving the program. So on page 209, so they talk about.
Can I just say one thing really quick?
Yeah.
It says one of the things they talked about was progressivism without partisanship. Progressivism is partisan.
Yeah, and
Not?
especially the way they've defined it. Like, I think you and I could come up with a definition that, that would involve, that would be less partisan, but the
Sure.
way that they have particularly defined it in a very partisan way. They specifically said that, that liberals are the ones interested in change, that liberals are progressive. So they have married the two in this article. Like, I think that we could quibble and figure out, just like, well, guess what? Conservatives, as in the German study that I talked about, guess what? Conservatives also want change sometimes. They, also interested in certainly in human progression, right? In human betterment, in social society betterment for society, social betterment. That and those things are, often, would be sort of like considered progressive, right? Movement towards something better. So I think we could come up with a nonpartisan definition, but they certainly haven't done it. And then again, that's why I'm saying, like, in some ways this reads a little bit like, they sent it to a reviewer, and a reviewer came back and said, you got to sprinkle some things in here, and they sort of, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that's what happened, but I like, you're being much more charitable, and you're saying, like, I think they're trying, and
social worker.
Yeah, exactly. And and you may be right. They're trying, and this may be actually revealing a flaw in their own education and a flaw in their own openness to experience, or whatever, that they are so indoctrinated themselves that they can't even see the forest for the trees. They can't see their own bias, well enough. They can't come at it from another direction and sort of see the other side, even a little bit, to get at a different angle. And so they throw in these little, it's like, oh, but look how we can see the other side, as, but they're not looking at it. They're not really looking. They're saying, we know other people see it from that side, kind of version. Yeah. So, but the part on page 209, is that right? Page 2. Oh no, that can't be. Is that right? Yeah, 209, where they're talking about this student who says that, if I
can't work with an LGBT.
Yeah. And so, but basically, here's the thing: they end this section or whatever, that they say that professors and the social work academy must determine when the formal education process has ended and the gatekeeping responsibility begins. They're literally saying that people like that student should not make it through a graduate program, that there should be an ideological litmus test. And it doesn't matter how you're, it's like one more reason. They are explicitly saying merit in an educational program. So how well a student has gone through the program is irrelevant if they don't also buy into the ideology. This freaked me out. I could not believe that they said. I mean, am I alone, or did this freak you out too?
To some degree. I mean, it's a common one. I thought, if you want to do us a favor, come up with something that's a little bit more unique than that one. That's an easy one to go after, and it's a pretty simple one to address and resolve as well. Is how do you do that? Well, you put somebody in proximity and working with somebody who is a sexual minority, LGBTQIA, and so forth, and doesn't, and it's just not relevant to the work that you're doing together. Now, if it's micro work, and you're doing something specifically with, that population, then so be it. But the best way to address that isn't to get rid of them.
Right.
It's to expose them to new experiences, to enhance their openness, to help them, I think that's what's moved LGBTQIA, rights forward, is interacting with each other and finding out that, what, it is what it is, but you know what, it's not relevant to what I'm trying to do, or what I'm, the work that we're doing together. So in a pluralistic society, we learned to find common ground, and to work together. So
Yeah,
so I
and
was so it did make me wonder, if I were a graduate student today, would I be admitted into one of these state sponsored, what do we call them? They're Hallmark institutions.
mhm.
Could as a white male Christians, cisgender, straight, I just check all those boxes of privilege, if you will. Is there any way that I could be admitted if I didn't endorse progressivism? If I had concerns about progressivism, is there any way I could possibly be a social worker? And my concern is that is ultimately going to shrink the tent. That will
Well,
shrink the influence of the profession, and it's going to limit the effectiveness of the profession in working with people who do not adopt a progressive.
yeah, and I agree that this was low hanging fruit in terms of this like hypothetical example of this, student who says they don't want to work with an LGBTQ person and would encourage them to change their behavior or
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, I don't know that that's, but the idea, okay, so they chose something, like you said, the idea that they would, that as social workers, they wouldn't, encourage an educational, the educational program to,
Yeah.
like you said, do some things like what Drew was describing. You do all this stuff in class where you're role playing and all that kind of stuff, and where again it doesn't matter. I'm sure that there's, all kinds of work in social work that doesn't involve, particular, groups or ideas that you don't like. You don't have to go, if you're a doctor, you don't have to work for Planned Parenthood.
Mm-hmm.
If that's not your,
Yeah.
So
Find your niche.
yeah, exactly. But so the very idea that they introduce that example and their
Coercion.
solution to the example is weeding, right? We
Yep.
just need to
Coercion.
weed these people out. We need to
Coercion.
separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yep.
Whatever. We could do some biblical things there. We could also use, like sort of this the very thing that anti-abortion, people would use is like, that we can't choose, we shouldn't be choosing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is almost like an abortive kind of thing that they're talking about. They're like, we need to just, like, doesn't matter, determine where the formal education process has ended and the gatekeeping responsibility begins. I mean, their example, I mean, this isn't a student who raped another student, right? Where, like, oh, we were supposed to be doing a class activity, and there was a criminal behavior, right? This is a student who is admitting in a social work class that they're concerned that they would have difficulty interacting with some people that they may need to interact with in the future.
Mm-hmm.
That's an opportunity that's a real learning opportunity for everyone in the room, because I guarantee you there ain't one person in that room who isn't either concerned or should be concerned that they're going to eventually interact with somebody with whom they have a problem.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And the way that you interact with them does not have to be coercive.
Right.
Does not have to be, controlling. Your first role is a social worker, not a political worker.
So,
Not a coercive worker, if you will. And that's not the same. Coercion and politics are
right.
not the same. But politics are ultimately about power, about enacting things that can happen at the force of law. And if you're suggesting that one political ideology needs to be your, um, you have to adopt an ideology in order to be a social worker. Well, then we're on pretty tenuous ground because, well, I think I mentioned this earlier that in some states, you know, we've seen this. The legislation's being enacted by conservative legislators, again, force of power to shut down those who are adopting or pushing a particular ideology. And so, it weakens social work when we take an ideological purist approach.
Yeah, because you know what? Tomorrow it could be your ideal.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
exactly it.
yeah.
Just focus on the 6 values: service, social justice, dignity and worth of the person, human relationships, competence, integrity. I mean, if you focus on those are the values. I don't see anything in the code of ethics that I don't think progressivism is ever mentioned one time in the code of ethics. To suggest that you have to adopt a progressive ideology, I think that would run afoul of many of the principles in the code of ethics.
And again, what is somewhat shocking is that this shows up in the International Journal of Social Work Values and Ethics and is presented to start with as an empirical investigation, and then kind of goes off on this, tangent. Now, they do say, I wrote nice next to this. Thus, embracing a progressive viewpoint does not mean minimizing diversity in discourse, but rather providing an opportunity to explore various viewpoints and to find find a place for community, a commonality. I'm sorry, commonality. The print job here was terrible. Sorry. For commonality and growth, a liberal progressive ideal is in its own regard. Yay!
Well done. Well done.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's, this is stuff that we talk about at the Institute for Liberal Values, right? What does it really mean to be liberal? And they, yay, they finally are there. So, it wasn't enough for me, but I was glad to see that acknowledgement there that, liberalism means more than, progressivism, and that we do need to make space for, for many shapes, sizes, and varieties of and perspectives. So
exactly. At the end of the day, there are some good things in here that knowing that this is the ideology that is most dominant, I would hope that there might be a question among some about, rather than, going for 100% from, 84% to 100%, that it's, what, if we don't create some diversity within the profession, we may lose influence. We will lose social workers. The world needs more social workers, more people willing to dialogue across differences and enhance the social in all of us. I just worry about losing that influence, reducing the number of social workers, being such an ideological gatekeeper that we're not bridging. We lose our credibility with people who have viewpoints different than our own. Any of those things can create some challenges. And ultimately, to say the personal is political, that's a common, mantra nowadays. Well, my preference is to say that the personal is more social. The personal is we start with social before we privilege the political.
Well, I think that's a hopeful way to end our conversation, but there's going to be more, right? We're going to have more than one conversation. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Matt and I reached out to the author of the article we just discussed. Dr. Stoeffler graciously agreed to meet with us to answer some questions. What follows is an excerpt of that conversation. Check out the podcast notes for a link to the full interview. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Stephen Stoeffler for taking his time to talk with us. So we read the first part of the article and we were like, woohoo! And then we got to the second part of the article, and that's where we felt a little confused. I say we, but especially me, I think more than Matt. And I should say, like, I'm in psychology. I'm not, and I'm a experimental psychologist. I'm not a clinical psychologist. Matt is the social worker. So I was reading this. Well, first of all, it's in the International Journal of Social Work Values and Ethics. And so we knew that it had to go beyond your survey, your descriptives. We knew it was going to go beyond that. To me, I was surprised at the second half of the article. So, again, to me, which is not necessarily fair, because I read mostly psychology journal articles. It felt, it felt almost like we flipped to the other side. So we're doing this descriptive study, and then it's like, it became more of an editorial piece or an opinion piece to me. And I wondered, I couldn't help but wonder if you were encouraged to go there by either, now that I know this is your dissertation, either by your dissertation committee or by the journal editors. If you were encouraged to say, we should be pushing progressive ideas by either a journal editor or a dissertation advisor.
It was not by a dissertation advisor. It was not by a journal. The comments and reviewer comments didn't turn up or turn down the volume at all. We were encouraged to do this by the three of us. So that was our ideas.
So I'm gonna quit talking now, because I think Matt probably wants to jump in. Now we've established that, so okay. Matt probably wants to jump in.
Very good. No, it was very interesting, and the things that we've been working on over the last little while, another colleague and myself, involves political and viewpoint diversity in social work. So when we found this article, we were very appreciative, and think there's definitely a valuable contribution that you've made here, and want to thank you for that. When we think about viewpoint and political diversity, this what you found was not surprising in a lot of ways, but I wondered if we've kind of developed some premises and some thoughts, and they're different than what you developed in the second part of the article. And so I think this is just where there's an opportunity for a helpful, rich discussion just from different perspectives on this. And the recommendation were, you mentioned two steps. And one is that we embrace progressive values on one hand, but at the same time, it seemed like you wanted to kind of moderate that as well, by suggesting we should not be engaging in groupthink. We should not be marginalizing people with different values and so forth, although we do embrace the progressive values. Did I capture that right? Is that kind of what your intent was?
No, that captures that, and when I say you in this, I'm not talking specifically to you and for you to,
sure.
For either of you to have to respond to this, right? But or say one person, can you have ideological views? I think we all do, right? We all have different, whether you call them worldviews or these types of views. And can you have those but have to temper those in a somewhat, right? Because it's not as if just because you have these views that you go all out in trying to it doesn't mean that you don't also see other people's point of views. It also doesn't mean that just because you have these views that you then stifle others' views, right? So I know it seems like there's kind of in me rereading it, it seems like, okay, so we go here and then we come back, and then we go here and then we come back a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But you know, if you think about social work practice in general, right? And you look at through the Code of Ethics, you look at through the EPOS from the Council on Social Work Education, that also kind of has that pattern, right?
Yeah.
Where we have our own views, and self-awareness is greatly emphasized, and competency of understanding others on a very long list and host of ideas, including political belief, is part of that. But yet, we are to uphold the profession's ethics and standards. So there's a moderating that takes place. One of the things that we're kind of saying in here is, based upon our understanding of the literature, based upon our understanding of where students, practitioners, faculty, curriculum, direction from professional organizations are, it is much more compatible with a more liberal ideological view. So why would we not embrace that if all the currents are going in that direction generally? Mostly, not exclusively, and not only, but generally in that direction. So it's not to say that you exclude others or exclude other viewpoints, but it's pretty clear through all currents going in one direction that you would embrace that way of doing things, but not to where you are all the way left, cut off to any viewpoint, cut off to any seeing the value in other things, cut off to, only toe the line, that type of thing.
But it does feel like when you say, you say educators must also ensure that academic freedom is not merely an ideal, but a practice within departments and institutions which will enable professors to maintain fidelity to their own guiding principles. I feel when I read this paper that you are advocating for academic freedom so long as it is progressive. So you're very clear that threats are from the right. You say that specifically. Existential threats are coming from the right. So that, if we go along with that, you say prepare to have pedagogy and curriculum criticized. The threat comes from the political right. And then, so you're very concerned about critical race theory, and so so believe me, so are we. But I don't know that I see that balance that you're saying that you have, because we come to an example where a student who can't come around should not graduate with a degree in social work. You imply that. You say that. I can read the exact quote, but that. The profession and the social work academy must determine when the formal educational process is ended and the gatekeeping responsibility begins. And that feels like you either get with the progressive program, or you need to get out. And I'm not sure, I mean, maybe you didn't mean that, but that's how I read it.
There's always written into the curriculum is within the accreditation standards and other things, there is a process where I think in the past they used the term gatekeeping, and they're not as savvy to want to use that anymore. But there's a process where, is it merely that people can do well on tests and grades and things like this, but
Exactly.
there's usually an interview. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Matt.
Do you have the soft skills, the interpersonal skills, the critical thinking skills, not just doing well academically?
Yeah, so that as well, and that if pretty much every program says, as far as supporting and upholding, the code of ethics, right?
So are the code of ethics then only compatible with progressive views?
They are not only compatible with progressive views. The field of social work is not only compatible with progressive views. I would argue that it is mainly or more on the side of being compatible with progressive views than conservative views, but it's not exclusive to that. And many things, could be considered neutral.
Dr. Stoeffler, you are obviously wrestling with things that we wrestle with as well. There's no real clear, easy answer here. And so we have talked about your article and some of your thoughts, and we really appreciate that. I'm glad that we've had this conversation. I wonder if I could propose, or just tell you, do you mind if I armchair author here and invite you to now critique where I might have gone with your research? Would that be okay?
Sure.
So please critique. We're not hurting your feelings. You're not going to hurt ours. What if, instead of embracing progressivism, we embraced viewpoint diversity? And that seems to go really well with your second goal, which was that we avoid groupthink and hyperpartisanship. That aligns very closely with that. And so what that might mean is that in social work education, we invite a student first to articulate and define their own values. Self-awareness is critical. Look at their own history, look at their own experiences, look at the things that matter most to them, and recognize that not everybody's going to believe the same, and or going to have the same values. Some might want a larger federal response to poverty. Some may want a more localized response to poverty. Some may want to address their poverty needs through local communities, faith communities, civic organizations. Others may want a larger systemic response. But you come to kind of get to know yourself, and then you seek to humanize other people's perspectives. You strive for the dialogue that I feel like we've had here this evening, and that you strive to understand one another's perspective and understand the moral foundations for the beliefs that you are espousing. And then we invite the student to take a look at the code of ethics. And we say, you take your values and you have to figure out, how does this mesh with the code of ethics? What are you going to struggle with? Where does it feel like a good fit? And then they themselves wrestle. They can self-select populations where they might serve. But this all starts within the context of just, yeah, social work does include people who are conservative. It includes people who are liberal. It includes people who are libertarian. It includes people who are progressive, who lean in those different things at different times of their lives. And if we seek to humanize, we dialogue across differences, and we stand for ethical principles, we integrate those things into ethical principles, then social work doesn't necessarily have to be ideological as much as it is principled. And social work values can align with conservatism as well as in different ways than they may align with progressivism. It could expand the tent of social workers. It could expand the number of social workers that are available in a world that really needs social work, and perhaps it could bridge ideological divides and a polarized world where if somebody with progressive values can articulate and communicate with somebody who's conservative, and somebody who's conservative could articulate and communicate with somebody who's progressive to find real solutions. Please poke holes in that. Tell me your thoughts.
It sounds really nice. It sounds really good. It really does. And probably most of that sounds like that could be ideal and would be very helpful. I think viewpoint diversity is very important. I think this idea of humanizing, as you said, importance of human relationships and these other things that we talk about. Yeah, if we could get along better and not fight as much, I think things would be better. If we could learn to see the humanity in each other, that would be good. But at the same time, those areas, when I talk about things like the whole 6.04 and the ABCD that falls under that in terms of expanding access and opportunity to folks and not being discriminatory based upon X, Y, and Z and these things, certainly liberals discriminate. Not saying that they don't.
Sure.
But as a in certain values, not that other people don't have certain values, but certain values are played up more by certain folks than others. I don't see a lot of conservative platforms or others saying like, let's try to address discrimination. Let's try to, have more opportunities, or some of the things that we're seeing there. The way it fleshes it out is it tends to be not exclusive to, but primarily in the domain of a more liberal perspective. And this is something the Code of Ethics is saying that you have to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I would say that it does happen. It just happens in different ways. That if you look at conservatism currently, I mean, it's evolved over time. Group identity versus individual identity. Group rights versus individual rights. Group responsibilities versus individual responsibilities. Where things are at today with, an emphasis on, checking our privilege and checking all the boxes that we do with regards to privilege and those kinds of things. There is a real strong emphasis on groups rather than individual, where there's just an emphasis on group rather than individual right. And individual rights and responsibilities is currently in today's climate a conservative position. Taking things out of context, I think where I would agree with you is that when you take something and move it out of its lane, there's no lane for race. there's no way that I don't. Can you think of anything where race is relevant? There's no lane for it, and so that's been called out. And so where would and what I'm saying is that's why racism is so deplorable, is because it's so obvious that what racializing anything, where does that make sense? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in a pluralistic society. So my point is just saying that conservatives do appeal to the code of ethics in a way that is different than liberals or progressive people, but there's room to address it. There's room for both.
In the individual versus group, right? We have this something called person and environment, and
Exactly.
community, and this idea of both. In looking at poverty in particular, that's my main area of focus, and looking at lots of pretty much everything that's I shouldn't say everything, because let's not seem self-righteous. I should say everything.
No, that's all right.
I've read a lot of things
Sure.
around 150-year span of time that's been written about poverty in major studies, and of course all the seminal works, but looking at this, and there's this, if you want an opinion, if you want a perspective, you can find someone that's going to support your perspective.
Exactly.
But when you start to do kind of like a meta looking at things, then you start to, maybe see a bigger picture. And the vast majority of poverty in the United States is more structural in nature than individual in nature, in terms of like the economy, political factors, other things, where the locus of control for most, not all, but for most of the poverty is beyond the control of the individual, right? Is beyond the control of the individual. But is there individual factors? Yeah. Do individual things, or they're a part of that. Now, most of the American population generally believes that poverty is primarily an individual domain. And they very much see it through a moral lens, and see that if you're poor, then that is speaking to your work ethic, or that you must be addicted, or that you're immoral in some way, or all these other types of things. And if we base our social welfare policies on a more individualistic viewpoint, which, as you said, in modern era, that is a conservative viewpoint, is to be more individualized in that viewpoint, then it will be of some benefit, but it's not really going to address things, as opposed to a more structural. If the source of the issue is more structural in nature, then you need more structural solutions. And that's going to reduce it by much more. That is much more of a liberal perspective on it, but it's also where the data says as well, where you would see a difference. So, our friend Bill Clinton, neo-liberal president, who has the welfare reform in 1996 and everything, and that was very much off of an individual focus. Personal responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. Heavy dose of personal responsibility, not a whole lot on the work opportunity side of things. And this is where we cut the programs, where we have work requirements, where you have time limits and all of these things. And it cut welfare by more than half of the welfare rolls. Did it address poverty?
Well,
not at all. It did not affect the poverty rate. Now it's just people were still poor, and now they're without benefits.
So are you saying that what Clinton did perpetuated poverty rather than addressed it? Or
Yeah, and I know this is where, this is a yes. He just critiqued
No, No,
I
no, no. I don't want to
critique.
corner you at all. That's
Yeah,
not
no,
my
like
intent at
I
all.
critique.
This is more principled than personal. I
Yeah,
I
no,
won't go
no,
there.
no. I'm an equal opportunity critiquer.
Sure.
Of I really am of whether it's a Democratic or Republican or whatever president. Yeah, no, that was a very neoliberal, and it was very much because that policy was based upon an individualized view
Right.
of poverty that is applicable. It's not
To
that it
some
has no
degree.
value, but it has much less value and much less weight than if it was more structurally based in terms of what the plan would be. So the
Gotcha.
poverty alleviation of it was next to
Yeah.
it
I
was
think I think
abysmal.
where it would be really helpful is if we could if there was it's pretty clear where folks on the right go too far. It isn't quite so clear where the left, the progressive, goes too far. And I think if there
Mm.
was that ability to say, okay, where are the parameters of uh, democracy? In the United States of America, what are the norm? Where are we looking at here? What is the parameter?
I do love the way that you end the article, and thus embracing a progressive viewpoint does not mean minimizing diversity in discourse, but rather provides an opportunity to explore various viewpoints and to find areas of commonality and growth, a liberal progressive ideal in its own regard. And I think if we all, left, right, center, adhere, had that, carried that around in our pockets, we would get along, a lot better. And so I really, I love that. That's not totally at the end of the article, but I think it's a lovely sentiment.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. No, we'll stand by the things that we put in here. Some of it does seem can have some contradiction. Life is ambiguous at points. It's not 100%. You use the term orthodoxy a lot. I'm not necessarily saying that it has to be, pure orthodox, but um, the what we as a group of writers and what we were looking at is saying that um, it appears as though social work is housed more in the left. More in the left when we look historic, not every era and every time. And it's not to say that it's exclusively or only in that area, but that a lot of the threats, and as you mentioned, the threats that we brought up were from the right. We weren't bringing up, we don't have a counterbalance in the article and say, and here's some threats from the left. But it appears to be more left, nested in the left, right? Where you said, where's that line? How far left? How far left would you go? That type of thing. Extremism on either side, this is me, is very scary.
Yeah.
On either side. We are more being pulled in polar, and there's less in the middle, and there's more going to the edges, I believe, now than in the past. I think embracing the values which we have interpreted as being more compatible, or at least expressed in the left, we say that's okay. It's okay to, as far as social work identity and these things, to be over there more, but not to say that that's the only way, not to say that it's all or nothing, not to say that we don't listen to people, we don't include people, not to say that there isn't value and insight on sides. but where, where there are issues that you hold up to the light of the code of ethics and to the other areas where it seems very counter to that, that we should be able to say that. Now, not in an abusive manner, not in a you must be silenced and I'm going to get you kicked out and, all that type of stuff, type of a manner. But we should be able to say that. And likewise, if there are things that come from the left that are also not conducive to social work or to the code, then that also is something that would have to be called out. Oh.
That we agree on. So very good. One last question in a sentence or two. What does it mean to you to be pro-social?
What does it mean to be pro-social? To let's see, to deeply care about others, being a pro-social worker, if you're saying pro-social in that regard, to help meet the basic needs of all people with particular attention. That first line of the code, how to best do that. How to best do that from an academic side, we're focused on research, we're focused on evidence, we're focused on actually trying to pursue truth in some way or accuracy in some way to best serve those who have needs, which is everyone, to best serve everyone. And so being open to that is pro-social. We talked about education, and I'd be remiss if we look at the word education. And if you look at the Latin behind education, within it, the meaning of education is death. It talks about death. Dying to our presuppositions and our ideas and growing and having growth in life. So death and life is found if you analyze the word education. And I think that we'd all be beneficiaries if we were able to be teachable and learn and grow.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your research, for your article, and thank you for contributing that. Thank you for coming tonight and talking with us and sharing your perspectives. And I think that's evidence of your pro-sociality. So thank you very much for your time and your willingness to discuss. And I hope that we can continue discussions in other arenas, perhaps with your colleagues. Your encouragement, I did buy the book. So
oh wow, okay.
I'll appreciate that, and I haven't read it yet, but certainly eager to continue to learn and learn together. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and it was good talking to you and with both of you, and I think it was a good conversation.
Thank you.